That's where we find National Senator Matt Canavan. Senator, good morning, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Let's start with Angus Taylor's long-awaited technology roadmap. It's going to be announced today. So 5 top priority low-emission technologies to be announced. Clean hydrogen, batteries, green steel and aluminium, carbon capture are among them. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, look, it's always good to be investing in technology, and I support that. I do think right now, though, given the economic hole we're in, we need to be focusing on technologies that will work, not ones that just might work. And hydrogen and batteries and green steel are all great ideas that probably are decades away and are only maybes. And so I think it would be much better for us to prioritise technologies we know will work to create jobs today. Things like high-efficiency, low-emission coal-fired power stations, fracking. Fracking's helped get the US. I mean, the US is not in the Paris Agreement, but they're cutting emissions more than anyone else because they're fracking. Those sort of technologies are proven ones that can create jobs in this country. The other thing is, look, I think we should get out of the Paris Agreement. We've got to stop the rubbish here. The Paris Agreement was made in China. It doesn't have any obligations on the biggest emitters in the world. Countries like Canada, and New Zealand aren't even meeting their Kyoto targets. Why are we continuing to go down this path when the rest of the world is not?
You're not getting anywhere on coal, though.
Well, I'll just keep up the fight, Peter, mate. I think it's important to stand for what is right, and what is right for this country right now as we start making stuff again. That's what I hear on the streets.
Okay.
When you say I'm not getting anywhere, mate, I mean, when you talk to people down the street, they just desperately want us to stop being reliant on China and make more things in this country. But we're not going to do that if we don't focus on what we have natural advantages in. And we have a natural advantage in coal, which we send to the world, including to China. Why don't we use it here?
You've written a piece in The Australian today comparing, you were critical of the Prime Minister's gas plan last week, and you've compared that to South Australia in 2016. Do you believe that history is going to repeat here, that it's kind of doomed for failure?
Well, I do think history is repeating. I wouldn't characterise it exactly like that because the South Australian plan has worked in the sense that it's kept the lights on. So when South Australia went black 4 years ago, their response was, the flashy response was to build a battery, but can only keep the lights on for about 8 minutes in South Australia. The real response was they bought a couple of diesel turbines and converted them to gas and installed them at the old Holden factory in Adelaide. And that has kept the lights on in South Australia. So on those terms, it's worked. But of course, South Australia now has some of the highest power prices in the world, and manufacturing's not rushing back to the once proud industrial heartland of this country that was South Australia. I want to get manufacturing back in this country. I think that's really important for the future of our nation. But we're not going to do that if we turn our back on our natural advantages. That's just the facts. And as I say, a gas-fired power station in the Hunter Valley would work. We'll find the gas, we'll run it, it'll produce electrons, it'll keep lights bright. But it will be really costly because we don't have a natural advantage in cheap, affordable gas in this country.
Just back
or at least in Eastern Australia.
Just back to the roadmap and your thoughts on coal. It is last on Angus Taylor's priority list. It's classified as a mature technology. It's in the so-called 4th tier. It's alongside gas, solar and wind. Does that irritate you?
Well, as I said, I'll go back to what I said earlier. I think we should be focusing on technologies that will work. We don't want to just roll the dice here. It's too important right now, given the economic state we're in, given, I think, the priority in our region to rebuild and reindustrialise this nation. There are things that we know we can just go to the shelf and buy them at the store. We can buy fracking technologies. We can buy a high-efficiency, low-emission coal-fired power station from Mitsubishi Hitachi today and install it and get it to work and get moving again in this country. And as I say, reindustrialise our nation. We are losing our manufacturing industry. It's gone backwards for the first time on record in the last decade. And if we continue down this path, that is going to continue to happen. Now, those other technologies that you mentioned, hydrogen, battery, I'm all for investment in them. It's important to try to push the frontier out over time. But I think most recognise that those technologies are decades at least away from being commercial. If at all they'll ever come off, they might not. Hydrogen's been talked about for decades as a fuel cell technology that could power cars. It just hasn't taken off the ground. There are some natural fundamental challenges with hydrogen, particularly the fact that it's not naturally found on its own like coal and gas is in the environment.
If you continue to be ignored, shall we say, on coal. Would the Nats consider walking away from joint party room discussions?
Well, I can't speak for my Nationals colleagues in that regard, but what I would say is that when we formed the coalition with Scott Morrison a few years ago, the fundamental point was that coal was going to be on an equal basis, and that's what the leader, Michael McCormack, said at the time. I, of course, would expect that to be honoured. We represent very strong coal communities here in North Queensland. We do so very passionately. As I say, we're very proud about the fact, we're very proud that we export this resource to the world. It helps power the world. Coal is still the major source of electricity in the world, and our coal is a big part of that. And so why shouldn't we be using some of that to create jobs here, not just send it overseas to help their economies?
Well, on this list today, it's interesting because it appears that nuclear is in the third tier, which is above coal. Are you at least pleased that it's on the board?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's really good that we look at nuclear again. That's the small modular reactors that are mentioned there in that third tier, as you say, are maybes. They're not commercial technologies right now. There's a lot more work to be done on those, but they do potentially offer great advantages to our nation with a more distributed, less concentrated energy network than other nations. Big conventional nuclear power stations would have a little bit of a problem integrating with our system. These small modular reactors don't have those disadvantages, but as I say, they're not commercial yet. So it's great. I'm not going to get too tripped up though, Peter, on 1 tier, 2 tier, 3 tier, 4 tier. I don't care. I don't care if it's written on paper. What I care about is results and the jobs we can create in this nation.